Well, meanwhile, Arthel, there's other news around the globe. Nuclear North Korea sparking new tensions this weekend. The regime of Kim Jong-un fired several short-range ballistic missiles yesterday. You know, that was the first test since it launched long-range missiles a month ago. Missiles that experts say could reach as far as Chicago. President Trump is monitoring the situation, we are told, while Secretary of State Rex Tillerson called for calm when he appeared earlier today on Fox News Sunday, saying the administration is working with our allies.
We're going to continue our peaceful pressure campaign, as I have described it, working with allies, working with China as well, to see if we can bring the regime in Pyongyang to the negotiating table with a view to begin a dialogue on a different future for Korean Peninsula and for North Korea.
So can that dialogue really begin? John Bolton joins us, former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Fox's contributor, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and chairman of the Gatestone Institute here in New York. You know, Ambassador, Kim Jong-un reminds me of my dog. You put a bone down, you tell your dog to sit, and he does. He obeys for a while, and then suddenly he'll just go and grab the bone. I mean, is that the behavior that we see? Secretary of State Tillerson said that there was restraint from North Korea, but that lasted only a few days before they popped off a shot.
Well, I have to say, last week Secretary Tillerson was saying that he thought that restraint was a good sign that they could get to the negotiating table. An assessment that lasted right up until they fired this salvo of missiles this weekend. I mean, I must say, I think the State Department is following the same pattern, much like your dog and the bone. That statement that you just played from Secretary Tillerson was an excellent example of Barack Obama's foreign policy. It's a policy that the United States has pursued unsuccessfully for 25 years. If we can just talk to the North Koreans, maybe we can chit-chat them out of their desire to have deliverable nuclear weapons. That strategy has failed for 25 years. It has brought us to the place we are today. There's no evidence whatever that North Korea's behavior is going to change.
So what will potentially change that? I mean, speaking of bones, President George W. Bush took him off the terrorist list. That didn't work. Bill Clinton, of course, had the famous 1994 oil for food trade, where they promised not to have nuclear weapons. That didn't work. Can China actually pressure them, or is that we're just dreaming?
Well, China has unique capability to pressure North Korea. There's no doubt about it. But they have failed these last 25 years to exert that pressure because they fear regime collapse. I think they understand that despite the nuclear program, the regime is much more fragile than appears on the surface. But they fear the collapse because of catastrophic consequences for China. That is the opening for the United States. There is no point whatever in continued negotiation with North Korea. If we're going to have a diplomatic solution here, and we are running out of time, it will be by persuading China that it's in their national interest as well as ours to seek to reunite the two Koreas. I think it's a hard argument to make. And I'll say again, we're running out of time. We don't have good options. We don't have another 25 years of trying to negotiate with a regime that makes lying into an art form. Because they are at the point, very near to the point next year perhaps, where they'll be able to hit any target in the United States with a nuclear warhead. Look at the full-page graphic in the New York Times today. This is not alarmism. The New York Times essentially corroborates what I've just said. And, of course, we could be off on that estimate. It could be by the end of this year. It could be 2019. But the fact is they are very close to being able to threaten us. And their objective is not simply to protect against American hostility. The Kim regime has never given up the dream of taking over all of South Korea, and a nuclear capacity will be used to blackmail us and the people of South Korea and Japan. If you don't like North Korea's behavior now, wait until they get a worldwide nuclear warhead delivery capability.
But then China certainly does not want a unified South Korea type Korea in the peninsula there. But that, of course, is the challenge and what we face, Ambassador Bolton, because of our pressing news with Storm Harvey. We have to go, but we will stay on this as always. Thank you for joining us on Sundays. Of course.
Nearly a quarter of the population of Texas living in areas covered by a federal disaster declaration from Tropical Storm Harvey. Rescue teams working around the clock to save people trapped in the floodwaters. A FEMA administrator talking about the rescue efforts.
Right now we are deep into the life safety mission of helping people be rescued through swiftwater rescue, search and rescue, and it's my job to coordinate that. So specifically what I mean is that under the National Response Framework, we mission assign the Coast Guard, we mission assign DOD assets in support of our state and local efforts, and you're seeing that take place right now.
Joining me now, Texas Governor Greg Abbott. Governor Abbott, I thank you for being here with me. Boy,
thank you.
Yes, absolutely, sir. Listen, the flooding continues, more rain on the way. Governor, you've got your hands full. What's your priority at this hour?
Protecting life. We have to do all we can to protect life. As you have seen the rain pour down in Houston, Texas, and in the entire region, because it's not just Houston, it's the counties around Houston also. Our top priority is to protect life. And that's why we've deployed about 3,000 National Guard and about 1,700 DPS officers to make sure that we're doing all we can to save lives. We have about 20 helicopters in the air doing air rescues. We have boats in the water. We're trying to work with local authorities, not just in Houston, but across the entire state to protect Texans.
I mean, you're doing a fine job from what we're seeing here, Governor. And on Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace, you gave FEMA, the president and his administration, an A+. Give us an idea of the type of behind-the-scenes coordination between the state and federal authorities. And can you tell us the latest request that you made to the federal government?
Sure. Well, the coordination began more than a week ago when Texas began working with FEMA in anticipation of the hurricane coming to shore, and we have been in daily contact with them. I personally visited with the president several times and with his cabinet members multiple times. And in fact, after visiting with Chris Wallace this morning, I visited with the FEMA administrator again as we continue to both prepare for and deal with these challenges, not just now, but as he made clear to me, he understands this is going to be a long time process cleaning up from this disaster. So the good news is Texas and FEMA and the federal government are working hand in hand as we help the local governments respond to these challenges.
And Governor, while you and I are speaking right now, we're showing live pictures there in Houston at the George Orr Brown Convention Center. This is new video coming into the newsroom here. We're showing this people there sheltering for who knows how many days to come. And you have laid out a comprehensive plan, Governor, before, during, and after Harvey. Insurance claims will soon be a priority. FEMA will play a major role, as you well know. Is there any way that you can work with FEMA to make sure that the process runs smoothly for those folks, some of them, pardon me, at that convention center right now, and others around Texas who are affected? And how do you know if you qualify?
Sure, but part of the good news about the fact that the president made the disaster declaration is that it triggered the involvement of FEMA. And so our work with FEMA is already underway. And FEMA will engage with all these homeowners and businesses as well as the governments, because FEMA will assist local and county governments also dealing with this. But as the administrator made clear to me earlier today, they are engaged and will stay fully engaged to make sure that all of these challenges from those people that you see at the George R. Brown Center are going to be addressed. Absolutely.
Pardon me, one of the executive actions that you've taken, you've waived the occupancy and room sales tax. You've issued state disaster declaration to multiple counties. What are some of the plans, next steps, Governor, that you're planning along those lines?
Well, and after we get through with the saving lives and the rescue process, it will be the rebuilding process. And in fact, we've already begun that where the hurricane initially hit. In the Corpus Christi area, we've had the Texas Department of Transportation working with the local community to begin clearing out roads and to begin the rebuilding process. And so this is a step-by-step process that's just going to take a while to rebuild from such a massive storm.
And Governor, you well know you've got 7,000 dams there in Texas, 2 in Houston considered extremely high risk. What's the strategy as it pertains to those dams, sir?
I'm very concerned about those dams there as well as in other parts of the state of Texas. I get a daily briefing on the status of them. The daily briefing today is that they are still just fine, but it's something that we monitor on a daily and multiple times a day basis.
Well, Governor Greg Abbott, I think you're doing a fantastic job. Keep up the good work, sir. Thank you, and on behalf of the folks in Houston and all of us watching, as our heart goes out to all of you there in Texas. Governor Greg Abbott, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Harvey hitting southeast Texas with a 1-2 punch. We don't have to tell you that. The winds dying down, but now the storm just sitting over the region, dropping torrential rains, bringing catastrophic floods. Homeland Security Advisor Tom Bossert discussing the danger on Face the Nation.
Let's not lose our focus on how bad this still is. Some news coverage outlets, not yours, are reporting that this is being downgraded and it's less of an event. It's just a storm now. That's a mistake. We're going to see continued rain, upwards of 30 inches. I don't think people understand what 30 inches of rain. I don't understand. I've been around dozens and dozens of major disasters and hurricanes, hundreds of disasters. I've never seen 30 inches of rain. So what we're going to do is pay attention to this, watch the inland flooding unfold.
Someone who may agree. Dr. Marshall Shepard is a director of the University of Georgia Atmospheric Sciences Program and former president of the American Meteorological Society. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. I assume you would agree with that statement.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement. And what's even scarier about that is we're probably talking more than 30 inches now. We're talking about 4 feet, perhaps, maybe even more. I mean, I just read that about 9 trillion gallons of water have already fallen on the area. That would fill Great Salt Lake twice.
So the narrative to say that the storm is weakening would be dangerous. And I want to put up a graphic for some of our viewers. It sort of shows the concentration of precipitation, and it's not going away anytime soon. It looks like we could be seeing rain up until Wednesday for these folks.
Yeah, and perhaps even beyond. You know, as meteorologists, we've known this for about a week or so. We have warned about the notion that Harvey was just going to stall out and that the inland flooding was going to be the story. And I think it could end up being the most disastrous flood event in U.S. history. But I was worried because as we started seeing coverage of the Cat 4 hurricane making landfall, I was immediately concerned that the focus was going to shift there, rightfully so, because that is a tragic event also. But we were always worried about this notion of 2, 3, 4 feet of rain falling in this region. And unfortunately, it's playing out.
And when you talk about the dangers of this particular part of the country, just when we talk about geography-wise, you're concerned about the inland flooding because the storm is stalling out. Obviously, all the water is going to try to flow south, flow toward the Gulf. That being said, once the ground is saturated and these rivers are at capacity, what happens with all this water, and what does it do to the infrastructure?
Well, that's right. When we see flooding is not always a function of what falls from the sky. It's also the impervious surfaces, how full the soil is from soil moisture, how we are effectively removing water from a stormwater management and engineering standpoint. And now we're seeing saturated soils in this region. The rivers are responding in terms of the basic water cycle that we all learned about in elementary school. And so this water simply has nowhere to go, and it's still raining, and it's going to rain. This is an important point to get across. We could be talking about rain in this region through Wednesday, perhaps even through next week. So it doesn't have a chance. That natural water cycle does not have a chance to recover. So I have long been worried about this since earlier in the week, and unfortunately it's bearing out. So we're offering our thoughts and prayers to everyone there.
My last question, Dr. Shepard, then where do we go from here? I've heard a lot of critics say, well, there should have been a federal response for a barrier system in place because Houston sits so low, it's in a bayou. But could that have been prevented? This have been prevented? I mean, the numbers that we're seeing, no one can match.
Yeah, this is an unprecedented event. That region certainly gets flooding, and I've seen people say, oh, we're used to this in Houston, we'll survive. No, you haven't seen anything like that. This is an unprecedented event. Certainly, there's discussion about evacuations, but I want to remind people that more people die in flooding from being in their cars. And so it's not as simple as we think to just talk about, oh, everyone should have gotten out. So let's just listen to our officials. We are going to see more flood events like this going forward in the future as we see changes in our environment and climate. So this is what we have to deal with. So we need to think about planning for the future.
Right. Dr. Shepard, thank you so much for joining us. A really interesting perspective. Thank you.
Well, the pictures out of Houston, you've seen them along with all of us. They are stunning, to say the least. Roads turning into rivers as the city faces a flooding disaster of historic proportions. Matt Finn is out there for us live, and he joins us now with more. So, Matt, tell us exactly where you are and what